Hello, this is Tony Bibbs with the GForge Group, and this video is part of our series of GForge tutorials. And today I'm going to show you a couple of ways for manage your project's backlog. Now, in our prior videos in this series, we shared this checklist to help you follow along when setting up a new GForge project. In our last video, we helped customize tickets, so we're going to build on that by implementing a backlog. As I said, GForge gives you two solid options for managing your backlog, so let's cover their benefits and drawbacks. The first and easiest way to manage your backlog is to update the status field on your tickets to include a backlog option. Doing it this way is great for smaller teams or those teams that don't want or need a sophisticated process. The only real drawback to managing backlog this way is that if you have two sets of tickets, say one for bugs and enhancements and another for support, then it makes release planning and reporting harder. For that reason, GForge gives you a more formal option for managing your backlog using releases. So using a release to manage your backlog takes just a bit more time to set up, but it has the benefit that you can add tickets from any tracker to your backlog. The other big benefit to this approach is that when you are doing your release planning, you can review the tickets in your backlog and move them into the appropriate release with ease. We recommend this approach for large teams or teams with a well-defined release planning process. So with that covered, let's show you how to implement your backlog both ways. We'll start by adding a backlog status option to your tickets. So using the GForge menu, let's navigate to your project, and in the menu next to the tickets, let's click on the gear icon. Then go to the Fields tab. Now go down to the status field that we added in our last video, and let's click on the edit icon. In the modal, let's add a backlog option, and let's leave it here at the bottom of the page. Now let's go ahead and click OK and save our changes. And that's it. So let's verify the backlog option is in there by creating a new ticket. So as you see, if we wanted to create a new ticket in our backlog, we can just select it here. Before we move on to show you how to implement your backlog as a release instead, I want to show you how you can quickly view your entire backlog. Using the GForge menu, let's navigate to our project and view the tickets. As you can see, I had a few tickets created already, so let's go ahead and add a couple to our backlog. So let's check the box next to a couple of tickets, and then from the Actions button, let's select Update Selected, and then change the status to Backlog, and then hit Update. So now that we have tickets in our backlog, let's show you how you can view your backlog at any time. For this, you have a couple of options. We can go to the Query dropdown and select Quick Filter, and then we can go down to the Status field and select Backlog. As you see, here's our backlog with two items, and while this is easy enough, you probably want to have your backlog available without having to constantly apply this filter. So let's create a query for this by going to the Queries dropdown, click on Manage Queries. As you can see, GForge ships with a few predefined queries, and we'll cover working with queries and ticklers in another video. So let's proceed by creating a new query for tickets. Let's call this query Backlog and share this with the rest of the team by clicking on the globe icon. And then let's sort our backlog by decreasing priority level. Finally, let's head over to the Field Filters tab. Now under Status, let's select Backlog, and then go ahead and save this query, and then return to our query list. And as you can see, our new query is there. So now let's go back to our tickets. So right now we still have our last filter showing, but moving forward, if we ever want to view our backlog, all we have to do is select our backlog query. That wraps up managing your backlog using a status. So let's show how you can implement your backlog using a GForge release. So from the GForge menu, let's go down to our project and then select Releases. Now we will be covering release management in a later video in this series, but briefly, this is where you can plan, track, and publish all your releases. So let's start by creating a new package. Now in most cases, a project will have a single package which is a deliverable. GForge allows you to add multiple packages in rare instances where your team might produce multiple unique deliverables. For each package, GForge then allows you to have multiple releases. So in the modal, let's call our package Core, and then make sure the entire team can see the package. Now let's save our package and go and create a release. So go ahead and click on New Release, and in the modal, let's select our core package we just created, and then set the name of our release to Backlog. We'll leave the status to Not Release, and then we'll move the date for the release way out in the future. Now let's save our changes. To make this all a bit more realistic, I'm going to quickly add a version 1 release. So this time I'll select the core package again, set the name to version 1, leave it as not released, and then move the release date out to September 1st. Now let's go ahead and save our changes. Now with our backlog all set up, let's go ahead and add a release field to our tickets. So in the GForge menu, let's go back to our project and edit the settings for our tickets. Now let's head over to the Fields tab. If you recall, we originally added backlog as a status for our tickets, so we'll need to get rid of that first. Now let's edit the status, delete the backlog option, and then go ahead and save those changes. So let's select New, then scroll down to Release. And in the modal, let's call this Milestone. And since all tickets should either be in a planned release or in our backlog, we'll make it required. Let's also be sure to leave the Roadmap button checked. This option is here because you can have multiple release fields on a ticket. If it helps, think of support tickets where a bug can be found in one release, yet fixed in a later one. So by checking the Roadmap box, we are using this release field for planning and tracking purposes. So let's go ahead and save that. And now that we have our backlog all set up, let's go back to our tickets and get them organized. All right, so we'll go back to our ticket list. And let's go ahead and add a couple of our items to the backlog. We'll use the mass update feature for this. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll add that last task to the version 1 release. So with our backlog set up, anytime you want to review items in your backlog, you can access them from the release roadmap. So now let's go to our project's releases. And here you can see our backlog in the version 1 release we created. Now let's go to the Roadmap tab. And this page gives you a quick summary of each release that is either being planned or in flight. And now when we click on the backlog, you'll see our 2 items in the list. Now the charts shown here aren't really useful for a backlog, but for planning purposes, you could go through your backlog and move any number of tickets out into future releases. So now that you have a way to manage your project's backlog, you are ready to move on to the next video in this series where we will show how GForge helps agile teams manage sprints.